Hi everyone, welcome back to Azure Data Factory video series part 6. So in this section, we'll be discussing about triggers and different types of triggers. So without any further ado, let's get into the concept. Triggers. So triggers are basically just a way that you can execute a pipeline run. Now let's say you have created your pipeline and that is ready to be deployed in the production. Now you want it to run the pipeline. So it's not a job that you go there and you run it manually every day. For example, you have batch processings and you have real-time processing, for example, and you are instructing to the ADF that you run this pipeline every 1 hour or maybe every night around 8 o'clock, end of the day reports, for example, or end of the day batch, right? So for that, you need to have an automatic process in place. So basically, triggers are used to automate the pipeline run. So you can advise or you can define that to run a specific pipeline on a specific time, and you can also schedule that. So triggers represent a unit of processing that determines when a pipeline execution needs to be kicked off. So mainly this is when a pipeline execution needs to be kicked off. So basically you are defining or you are telling to ADF using triggers when you want to execute a pipeline in an automatic fashion. Okay, and what are the different types of triggers you have? Basically you have three types of triggers: scheduled trigger, and then you have tumbling window trigger and event based trigger. So let's try to see one by one. So what is schedule trigger? So I think the name itself says it's basically self-explanatory. So basically you are trying to schedule a trigger. So a trigger that invokes a pipeline on wall clock schedule. Basically I say that every day morning 9 a.m. you trigger my pipeline. So that comes under schedule trigger. Then you have another type which is called tumbling window trigger. So a trigger that operates on a periodic interval, basically that is called a tumbling window trigger. So there is a slight difference between schedule trigger and tumbling window trigger. We will look into that. And then you have a third type of trigger which is called event based trigger. So basically this is nothing but a trigger that responds to an event. So let's say I do not want my pipeline to run every day or every 1 hour. I want my pipeline to respond, or I want my pipeline to run based on a specific event. Event could be copying a file from one location to another location. Once that file is being copied to specific location, then you trigger my pipeline. Basically my pipeline picks that file and sends it to another location. That could be a use case. Okay, so basically these are the three types of triggers we have. Then if I look into the Azure Data Factory, for example, so if you remember that we've created this demo pipeline one in section 3, creating your first Azure Data Factory pipeline. There we've used this copy activity to copy from source, right, test data input, and also we have created a sync data sets. Basically we've created two data sets, source and sync, and we used copy data pipeline, uh, maybe copy data activity, and created a demo pipeline basically to copy the file from source to sync. Right, now we have created the pipeline. So let me close this so that we have more space. So now I want to run this pipeline. So what are the options I have? So if you see, you have a option called add trigger here, right? So if I click on this guy, so basically if I click on this guy, I have two options. Either I can trigger it now, so basically trigger now, which is like manual trigger, or I can create a trigger, any one of the type, like schedule, event based, or tumbling window. I can create any of that type of trigger, and I can tell, or I can define saying that you run this automatically every day, for example, right? So you can also have a manual trigger. If I click on trigger now, basically, so it says that okay, it takes the last published configuration. That's fine. If I click on OK, so basically now it's running the pipeline. So basically this pipeline does copy a file from source and sync. So this is a manual trigger, but I do not want to manually trigger this every day in the morning. That's not my job. I want to automate this process. So for that, you could create a new trigger here, then choose the trigger. Basically, I do not have any triggers created. Okay, that is succeeded. Okay, so I do not have any triggers created. Either I can click new, which will allow me to create a new triggers, or I could go to manage, and then I could also create a new triggers from this section. So you have multiple places where you can create the triggers. And if I go to monitor, just to show you something here, you have a monitoring dashboard with different types of triggers. So if you see here, if you click on all, basically if you have any triggers, you get the statistics of those triggers here. But you have schedule based triggers, tumbling window, storage events, and custom events. Basically these two come under event based triggers. Okay, so currently we do not have any triggers. Let's try to create one trigger and see how to do that. So if I come here, if you're under triggers, then you click on new, and then it asks you to create the name of the trigger. Okay, so I put schedule hyphen. Okay, it doesn't like hyphen. Okay, so you have a specific naming convention. Then I say schedule underscore trigger, right? And then add some description here. So basically I wanted to show you what are the different options you have. So when it comes here on the type, basically you have four different types: schedule, tumbling, and event has two different types. So now I want schedule. Okay, you select that. Then it asks you what is the start time for this. So when you want to choose, when you want to start this trigger, so basically you can fill in the start time. Then you can also give the time zone as well. So which time zone you want the trigger to follow. And then you can say that what is the recurrence time. So whether you want to run it like every day or every 2 days, every 15 minutes. Okay, so if you click on this guy here, you have a couple of other options. So basically you can configure whether you want to run it minutes or hours, days, and weeks, right? This is the granularity, and you also have months as well. So let's put it for minutes. So what I'm trying to say is you run this every 15 minutes. You run the pipeline every 15 minutes. You can also specify the end date when you want to end this complete pipeline. You do not want to run it after the specific end date. You can also add some annotations. And here you have a checkbox. Basically, it says that if you enable this checkbox and then you click on OK, you are saying that you start the trigger immediately after creating this trigger. So basically, you don't have to enable this. So this is start date, and every 15 minutes you run this trigger. So this is schedule based trigger. Okay. So then I have tumbling trigger. So when it comes to tumbling trigger, if I select tumbling trigger, let's try to see what are the different options. So I think you need to understand the slight difference between tumbling trigger and also schedule based trigger. So basically the start date is same for both, and then the recurrence is also same. But if I click on these units, basically the granularity here for tumbling is for hours and minutes, whereas for schedule it was still months, days, and weeks, right? This is a major difference between these two different types of triggers. And then if you click on this advanced option, you also have an option to add dependencies. For example, if I click on this, so you could also choose if there is any other trigger. Let's say I'm saying that you depend this trigger on another trigger. Once the other trigger is finished or started, then you run this trigger. So basically I'm adding a dependencies here with different triggers. So you also have an option to do that. And then if I click on the advanced, and you can also configure a few other options. You can add delay, you can have concurrency, how many triggers you want to run simultaneously. If the pipeline fails, you can also say that retry for 3 or 4 times again, right? Because for network related, sometimes if you're running this under VNet, if the network is down, it could also fail. It doesn't mean that the pipeline is wrong. You could retry as well. And what is the retry interval time as well in seconds? You can also define that. You can add annotations, and this is the same start trigger on creation. Basically, this is a tumbling trigger. Let's also look into the storage event. So basically event based trigger. So event trigger. Yeah. So here with for event based triggers, so basically the options you have here to configure is, so you select Azure subscription. Okay, you fill in all the information, what is the storage account and things like that. Maybe let's try to fill in this information, and then I have different storage accounts. Okay, let me fill in this information. You also need to provide the container name. Okay, for example, container name is not written. Okay, let me look into the container name what I have within my Azure storage account. So if I go to portal.azure.com, I just want to check my storage accounts and container names. For example, if I go to the storage accounts, and then within this storage account, I just wanted to check what is the container I have. Okay, I have source and sink. Maybe I can give SOURCE source, and this. Okay, this is in the same in the correct format it's expecting. Now you need to give blob path. let's say blob path begins with, blob path ends with, you can also give those regular expressions here. Okay, so what is the event here, right? Choose which events are associated with this trigger. So when you want to run this trigger, what is the event you are defining? So whenever the blob is created, you trigger this pipeline, or whenever the blob is deleted, you create this pipeline. Basically, this is the event I'm giving here, right? So this could be one use case. If there is a new blob created, then you just trigger this. This trigger is based on the event, which is blob creation or blob deletion. And then you have another type, which is custom events. So more or less you have the same options here, and then it is basically customized. So when it comes to storage accounts, it's specific to storage, but this could be more customized, right? And you have a couple of options here which you can configure as well, and you can also add some advanced filters. And event types, you can also add, you can also give some event types. But for custom events, we will look into it with an example when we do more practical sessions with the mapping data flows and with different control flow activities. But for now, you have to understand that there are types of triggers, right? And how to configure them basically. And if I go back to my session, yeah, so basically these are the three different types of triggers we have in Azure Data Factory. So I hope you like this session or this video. If you think you've gained any knowledge out of this by this, I kindly request you to subscribe our channel and also share it with your